Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight we are on episode 275, and we're going to be talking a little bit about some consideration for your pets before you go into the woods. Now, this was a topic that was suggested to us by one of our friends that is no longer with us, and those who know, and those who don't. Sorry, folks. But in any case, it was something we kind of had tucked on the back burner, and we figured we'd get to it now. It's been a little bit of time, and it feels about right. And it's that time of year. People are going to start taking their pets out. I mean, a lot of folks already have, don't get me wrong, but now we're coming into summer. School's over. People are heading into the woods. They're bringing their families. They're doing some camping. They're doing some trailing. Seemed like a good time to resurrect this one and kind of go over it. Now, Ben has quite a bit of experience traveling with pets into the woods, so we're going to tap into some of his knowledge and suggestions there. And I've taken my dogs into the woods a couple times too. Well, not this dog, the previous ones. So I got a little bit of experience, but I think, Ben, you got me far outclassed on this one.
Yeah, we for close to 20 years did a lot of camping, and our dogs were constant companions with us. And so for a few years it was just the one dog, both on either end, and then for the center it was both dogs most trips. And sometimes there's one dog I would prefer to take, so if I was doing a solo journey or just with a couple of buddies, I would leave one dog with the family and I would take the dog that was more appropriate for that trip. Yeah, I think first off, if you're thinking of taking your dog and you feel that it's a trip that your dog can actually do, I highly recommend it. They're great companions, and it always added to my trip. That being said, there's a lot to consider when taking your dog.
You know what? Before we jump into that, you made a good point. Let's start with the benefits of taking a pet with you. Because I do know we're going to have a significant amount of people that are going, well, why would I do that? There's extra work. Because yes, there is some extra work, but it is rewarding. So Ben, why did you take your dog with you camping a lot of the time? Because I've seen you do it.
Well, for one, let's go with Molly. Molly was my favorite dog to take camping. Molson was good, but Molly was a 30-pound Husky Poodle mix, maybe some Collie in there. So she was large enough that I felt she could protect herself from most threats in Nova Scotia, and well-behaved enough that she stayed with me. So if I had to let her off the leash, sometimes having a dog on a leash is a hassle. I knew she would always be within so many feet of me. She provided me with a lot of stuff. Companionship for sure. A sense of security. If something did come too close to the site, she would alert me. She would let me know. Yeah, and I think those are the two things. It was also always gave me something to do. Like, because I had the dog, I had to make sure she was in good shape and she was protected. She had a place to sleep, or she had her food. I had to do those things. But I never minded it because it was definitely worth the effort that it was to take my dog. And some of the trips, and I've mentioned this here before with you, I've had people fight over who got to have Molly in the canoe and who got to sleep with her closer to them at night. One time we had a cabin with bunk beds, and the two old men on the trip wanted the lower bunks, and they argued over who got Molly to sleep with her because she wasn't making it to the top bunk where I had to sleep. So,
and that's the big thing right there, is you hit the two big ones I was thinking of too, is companionship and a little bit of security. And I know people are going to be like, well, how much companionship can you get from a pet? They don't talk back and stuff like that. Well, you know what? When I used to take my little Boston Terriers into the woods with us, I'd have full-on conversations with them. Doesn't matter if they talk back or not. Sometimes it's just good to get your own thoughts out. Maybe if you're planning to do something, if you're going to, the order you're going to do things in, if you're thinking about an idea, you can talk it out. And it's just nice to have something, someone, whatever, to reflect those ideas back. Doesn't necessarily have to respond. I still talk to my dog at home. If I'm out in the garage working and she's around, I'll be working on a motorcycle or something like that, and I'll be talking myself through it to the dog. Does that make me crazy? Maybe. Has it helped me a lot? Absolutely. And I do the same thing in the woods. And yeah, there is the security. Now, maybe my dogs, once again, Boston Terriers, the security's not there. They're not going to really fight a bear for me. But much like what you said, they do alert you. They do have a keener sense of smell, a little bit of sense of hearing. They're going to alert you that something may be around before you notice it. So at least you can perk up your attention and see what's going on. And it's just fun to have somebody else camping. Like, if anybody that's ever done solo camping just by yourself and then has gone camping with a buddy, it's just more fun. I mean, there is times when you want to be alone, but then there's times where you just want to have that other person, that other interaction. And that's where pets come in, because one, hopefully, they're already your pet. You already have them at home, ready to go. You're not just scooping them up off the road, and we do not condone that in any way, shape, or form. But, and it saves you a little bit, because if you are somebody that's by yourself, you live alone, maybe you have a significant other, but you're not living together yet or whatever. If you want to go into the woods, now you have to find somebody to take care of your pet when you're gone. So sometimes it's necessity that brings them into the woods. And that's kind of how I learned to do it. And it was a lot of fun. You know what I mean? It was just necessity. It wasn't going far. This is before Melissa and the Boston Terriers and stuff like that. An old black lab used to take with me camping. And that was just the necessity. Nobody was around to watch the dog. And I couldn't leave it alone for 3 days because that's cruel. So, okay, all right, you're getting in the truck and we're going camping, and honestly I fell in love with it. But yeah, getting more back to on point here, there is considerations, and you mentioned a couple of them there, and I think we're going to dissect them a little bit in the time we got. So what is the one major consideration that you would throw out there, Ben, for anybody that's thinking about taking their pets or maybe is new to it? Like, there's something that throws big alarms in my head. Is there something that throws big alarms in your head?
There's quite a few, actually. Very first, if you're doing an overnight trip, accommodations, and by that I mean, where is the dog going to sleep? Because the chances are the dog's going to get wet, it's going to get dirty. You might say, oh, it'll sleep next to me in my sleeping bag or in my sleeping area, and you really have to have a plan for that, because honestly, it can really ruin a lot of gear if you haven't properly trained your dog. For that. But the other thing that I really think that needs to be brought up is training. You do have to make sure your dog has the right training, and it has to do with a lot of stuff. If you don't have good recall on your dog, then you have to have it tied on all the time. How it sleeps, how it eats, even. All these things are more important when you're in the woods than when you're at home. So do make sure you have that. Like, you need to be able to trust that companion to do what it's supposed to do when it needs to do it. Otherwise, it's going to be too much of a burden. It's not a hard thing to do, honestly. I've never had an issue, but I do know it can be.
And that's the thing. Sorry, go ahead, Ben. I'll let you finish your thought.
I was saying, what were your thoughts?
Well, you hit the big one right there, was the capability of your pet in the woods. So training. Now, that doesn't mean they have to, fetch, roll over, play dead, give paw. Nothing so sophisticated. Like Ben said, if you call your dog and it comes back, that's basically where you gotta be. You know what I mean? It has to stick around you, and it has to be able to come back, providing you're not gonna, leave it on a leash. If you are gonna leash a dog, and that's perfectly fine too, that's another consideration you have to take in there with how to deal with the leash while you're walking around in the woods, depending on how long your lead is. That can create its own complications, but I'm sure everybody can kind of picture that one. Now, the next big thing that pops to mind to me, and we're gonna kind of trickle down these a little bit, consideration that's not really taken a lot of the time, is the actual capability of your dog. Now, once again, Boston Terrier. I can outwalk my Boston Terrier. You know what I mean? By the time I'm getting tired, my dog is almost dead. Because once again, you got to remember, this dog only sits like 9 inches in the air, and its legs might be 7 to 8 inches tops. And it's trucking along, not at a slow walk, at almost a jaunt to keep up with my walk. I walk fairly quick in the woods, and I'm sure Ben does too. Well, I know Ben does, but anyway, I'm sure most people tend to walk a little quick in the woods because you kind of get focused in and you go. And that's one thing I had to learn when I started getting the smaller pets, was I have to set my pace for my companion. If I go as hard as I go, the poor little dog is worn out before I'm halfway to where I want to be. And then now that creates more complications. I don't want to push the dog too hard, because then, same as any human, they're going to get tired. They're going to start, making little mistakes. They could get injured more often. Or worst case, I may now have to carry this pet, which not so bad with, a 16-pound Boston Terrier, but a 30-pound dog, that's going to get heavy after a couple hours.
Yeah. Actually, that's something that has always been a factor to me, and it's not a factor to everyone. I like a dog that I can pick up and carry. And so I try to keep my dogs under 45 pounds because I I know I can carry 50 pounds all day if I have to. So a 45-pound dog, I can get him out of the woods. It may suck. It may be one of the worst experiences in my life, but I can do it. I can't, in good conscience, pull a 90-pound dog out of the woods, or even a 60-pound dog, if for any length of time. Uh, for a while, yes, 100%, but it's going to have its issue, especially if this is an animal with a broken leg and it's whimpering in a lot of pain. You're going to really have to struggle with that. So that's a factor for me, but not a factor for everyone. I know people go out with German Shepherds, Bernese Mountain Dogs, these large breed dogs that are quite capable. Um, but my 15-pound poodle would outwalk you.
Once again, capability of the pet. You know what I mean? A lot
Yeah.
longer leg, a greyhound, not a very big dog, like heavy-wise. But I can guarantee you it would outwalk you and I put together plus three. You know what I mean?
We took my 15-pound poodle when he was just a puppy on the Liberty Loop Trail, and I swear he walked that trail 3 times for what we did, because he ran ahead, he ran behind, he ran ahead, he ran behind, he yo-yoed the whole trip. He easily tripled the distance, and when we stopped, he passed out. And as soon as we got moving, he was up and going again. He would not let us leave him behind. Molly would outwalk anyone. I don't believe there's a person that could outwalk Molly in her youth. In later years, when it was a different story, and that's something to experience. But yeah, generally a healthy dog will do pretty good. It can go a long distance. They can walk almost all day. But terrain makes a big difference. If you're doing a lot of climbing and steep things, then these smaller dogs have to do a lot of jumping, and that's a lot more energy, and the risk of them missing a jump and hurting themselves increases. So think about the type of trip you're doing.
On top of that, with capabilities, is keep in mind your dog's not wearing shoes. If you're walking around, and literally this is a big consideration people miss. I'm not going to say all the time, but frequently enough I'm going to mention it. If you got to cross asphalt or something like that, realize that's hot. Your dog may not be able to walk on that comfortably. If you're going through a lot of rocky, shaly areas, your dog's paws or pads, they may get cut up. If you're going through a lot of water, they may get colder quicker. Keep in mind, your dog's feet are not as protected as yours would be. Not that it's the limit all to be all, but it's something to keep in mind. You got to be a little bit more thoughtful about the path you take and the trails you're going to blaze. That makes sense, Ben?
Makes perfect sense. To that effect, I guess maybe we should get into a little bit of first aid.
Sure thing.
Now, we are not first aid for dogs in the least, but do realize that a dog can get injured, and it's a good idea to do some research on that and take a few things for them. Things like a little bit of Vaseline put on their feet if they get too dried and cracked can help. Chapstick, I think, is also useful.
Yep.
If they get cut, you still need to protect that cut, so you may have to, bandage or cover it up over, or put something on it. Liquid Band-Aid helps for small cuts and nicks. Things like that, because they got fur, and you're not going to be able to stick a regular Band-Aid onto it super easy. You may have to build a splint if they do damage a limb and you need to mobilize it. Keep this stuff in mind. There's also some medicines you can carry for dogs, especially if they have any issues. Make sure you're carrying those things. But just be aware of that aspect of it.
Kind of tying into that, seeing we're on the topic, bug or pest control for your pet. It's not like you can really hose them down with bug spray like you're going to do yourself. You may be able to throw like a bandana around their neck that's got some deterrent in it, get them one of the collars, give them their flea and tick medications and stuff like that. But keep in mind, it's still not as much protection as you're going to have. I know my dogs, and I say my dogs because I'm still thinking of the previous 3 Boston Terriers we had. So we used to take them out as a cluster or a clutch, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, those dogs with very short legs, short hair, a lot of skin exposed, mosquitoes were a big problem with them. We would even put little shirts on them and things like that to try and keep some of the mosquitoes down. We would frequently stop and give them breaks and make sure they were petted down. We were constantly checking them for ticks, even though they'd have their tick medications and things like that. We don't want them bit anyway, and we don't want them bringing it into the tent or something like that as well. So tick checks became very frequent. Other things to consider along there. Just a quick thing here from Jacob DeFord. His cousin used to put small shoes on his dog when they would go hiking, and if your dog can stand that, that is awesome. There's a lot of dogs that will not handle anything on their feet. They'll either continuously try to kick them off, or in one of my dog's cases, they just froze up. Like, literally froze. Would not move, would not budge, wouldn't do anything, barely breathed. It was like just borderline art.
And the same advice I would give to anyone for putting on boots on themselves too. Don't do a 3-day hike, 20, 30 kilometers a day with your dog and that be the first time they ever wear booties.
Exactly.
They will chafe, they will have issues. It's going to change how their feet work, how they can climb, and all the things they do. They lose access to their claws. It can be beneficial, especially like I said, hot sand and rough soil, and you get the sites where there's garbage and stuff on it. They could cut their feet, infections. But on the flip side, it does change their natural ability to move around. So if you're going to do that, make sure that they're used to it and trained to use that, so that it's not a hindrance and more of a help.
I guess I should point out here, we're saying dog almost exclusively in this, but this applies to almost any pet you want to take into the woods. And on that note, I guess, consider the pet you are taking into the woods. I knew somebody that used to take their cat until their cat got away once. And then they, you know what I mean? After a week of looking for this cat, that was the last time they took their cat out. Cat was generally pretty good, stayed around the person, but decided to go for a tour. You know what I mean? Like, make your own decisions on this. A lot of the same things are still going to be transferable between pets. We're going to say dog just because that's what we both have experience with. But I do know people, like I said, they used to take their cats. I knew another feller that used to take his ferret. The sky's the limit if you're willing to do it. What's that?
Pigs, horses, goats, pigs, whatever you
want.
want.
Well, horses are another thing, and I think we've talked about that lightly. Once again, just same considerations, except they got a little more hardy feet. And they're probably going to help you drag some stuff along with you, too. But still, you got to have to consider where they bedding down for the night. Horses sleep on their feet, but if you're, hiking up a cliff, that's unrealistic to try and park a horse there for the night. It's food, it's water, things like that. So, yeah, we're saying dog just because that's what we have the experience with, but it's interchangeable. If anybody wants some suggestions on a specific animal, I'm sure we can track down some pretty good information for you if you give us enough time. Anyway, jumping back into it. Yeah, don't let the first time that your dog goes out in booties be when you're trying to go to the woods, because you are definitely going to create yourself some massive headaches there. They should have ample experience with these. Throw these things on in the house and let them walk around where it's a little familiar to them and they feel safe, because chances are it's going to freak them out a bit. Then take them for light walks around the neighborhood. Expand out from there. And then, of course, there's those unicorns where you can throw boots on, they don't care, and off they go. If you have one of those, awesome. 99% of the time, that is not going to be the case.
Talking about gear in general, there's a few things you want to make sure. Any restraining devices you have on them should be able to break away in an emergency. I have a love-hate relationship with collars on pets. To me, they should be strong enough to be able to restrain them when you need to. But if they're running through the woods and get caught somewhere, you may not be able to find them. They could panic, so there should be some kind of ability for them to break free of it or get free of it in an emergency. Packs and life jackets. I had both for my dogs. Awesome things in the right time. My pack, I was able to pack the food and collapsible dishes in, and my dog could carry those for quite a ways with very little issue. I did have problems where they did eventually hook and things and get pulled off, and I had to go retrieve them and find them. Very frustrating. Life jackets. Not all dogs need life jackets, but when they do need them, they are great. Plus, they provide an awesome handhold. If they get out of the boat, you need to get them back in. So even if your dog's a great swimmer and you're not spending a lot of time in water, it may be something useful.
And I've actually had the experience where I was out and about, and the dog was looking over the edge. I don't know if it was trying to take a drink and got a little too far, but anyway, kersplash. It was way easier just to grab the handle on the back of that life jacket, pick the whole dog up, set it back in the boat, and keep on about my business. If it didn't have a life jacket on it, I assume that would have been a lot trickier, and that's going to become exponential with the size of the pet as well.
Well, Molson, my poodle, hated being in a boat and did not like to swim. But once he got so close to shore, he would choose to swim over staying in a boat. So we had to be careful on narrower streams and going through certain spots on lakes, because if he thought he could make it to the shore within a few seconds, he was over the edge and gone. And oftentimes he'd hit the water and kind of realize that was a mistake. And having that pack on him, that life jacket, meant I could paddle up next to him, reach in, pull him out. And I don't know how many times I pulled out an absolutely soaking dog and put like half a gallon of water inside my boat because everything sticks to that thing. But yeah, no. Proper gear for your dog, it's important. It's another companion that's going in, no different than a person. You have to take into consideration what would you do for a person. You know, food, shelter, clothing, protection. You mentioned it, like the collars that repel insects and stuff, ticks. All these things are a risk to your dog, and so you need to protect them for it.
And another big thing I wanted to mention with any pet going in there is, we kind of talked about it but didn't talk about it, with the collars and the harnesses, proper identification for your dog in the event you do get separated. If somebody finds your animal, you want to make sure that that can get back to you. So they should be tagged or chipped or whatever the case may be, both if that's your thing, but bare minimum some sort of tag with their name, your name, contact information on it, like just a phone number, whatever, you know what I mean? The ones that I like for my dog, they're the ones that go on the collar and they kind of like slip through like a belt buckle. They're not dangling down. The dangling one makes noise and my dog constantly hates the noise and tries to eat the tag. So we got her name and our phone number put on her like collar, basically. It's just this brass slip-on that goes on. And as you were saying about the collars, they should be weak enough to break away. What I do with mine is generally the collars I leave just loose enough that if they really had to, they could pull their head through it. Because unfortunately, Boston Terriers, they are not the strongest animal on the planet. So they're not going to break much. And I do know there's going to be people out there that say, well, if you do that, there's always a chance they're going to lose their collar. And I mean, it's that fine line. In an event that if my dog was incredibly scared and pulling backwards, they're going to pull this off. But generally, my dog's well-behaved enough. A little bit of restraint on the collar, it's not going to try and pull its head out. Like, I can put a leash on her and walk her, and she's perfectly fine. You know what I mean? But like Ben said, I don't want her out in the woods, even in the slim chance she gets a few feet away from me. And gets tied up somewhere and then I can't find her. Because Ben and I have talked about stories in the past where people have been lost and found deceased within walking distance of trails. It doesn't take far or long for somebody to disappear and not be able to be found again immediately.
You can get collars with GPS receivers.
Yes, if you want to step it up a notch.
And some of them are training collars, so you can actually send them messages through it. There's different options. You can zap them through it if that's your thing. But whatever it is, you can see where they're to. You can recall them with it. I knew somebody, or I was watching a video a little ago, they had a recall thing where they hit it, the dog would always go home. So regardless of whether it was in hearing distance or not, it would know. And they said the frustrating thing is your dog runs away, and you hit the button and you want to get mad at them because they ran away, but you have to be happy with them because
they came back
when you called them. And so you have to think about how they're interpreting the message you're giving them.
And nope, just before we move on from collars, another thing that we use is light up collars. And I mean, you can pick them up at the pet store, or Amazon, stuff like that at night. Even when we're cabin camping, I don't keep the dog on a leash a whole lot because she stays pretty close to me and she listens pretty good, and it's getting better. Now, my other 3 dogs, I had a leash in my backpack, very rarely on it. They all stayed within eyesight or earshot, and they knew to. And the second I was like, here, all 3 of them, bang, right at my feet. The puppy here, Ducky, she's still learning, so a little bit more restraint on her. But yeah, just a nice light up collar. You let them out at night for a pee or whatever, you just snap the collar on, you can see where they're to. Boston Terriers, in my instance, they're black. You know what I mean? A lot of black fur on there. At night, they can disappear after 3 feet being away from you. Easily.
Yeah, we often, even the small glow sticks, you just tie one of those to a collar, something like that. Anything to make them stand out a little bit for yourself. Yeah. I don't think there's anything else I really wanted to hit
Well, the last thing I put in there, and we talked about it, but let's give a little more clarification to it, is food and water. Don't just assume that your dog's going to drink from the streams and stuff while you're out there, because if you wouldn't drink from it, should your dog be drinking from it? Yeah, they have a little bit of different gut bacteria and stuff like that might be a little hardier, but still, you don't want your dog catch beaver fever or something like that. You should have a way to give them clean water and hopefully discourage them from drinking too much unknown water out there in the woods, because you never know what they're going to pick back up. They could pick up a parasite like a tapeworm or something like that, and it'll be a while down the road, and it's just going to be a whole headache for you. So with my dog, it's literally a water bottle with like a little dish attached to it, and I keep that full. I got the dog drink from there. When I process some water for myself through the mini or boiling it or whatever and fill my canteen, I fill their canteen. Even if there's water left in it, you should flush it out and rinse it out. When dogs drink, and other animals as well, you'll notice in their dish they kind of form that scum or that slime or whatever when they get a little heated and stuff. You don't want that going back into them. Like, you know what I mean? Clean it out, give them lots of good drinking water, and bring them something decent to eat. You don't want to be feeding them like basically your leftovers the entire time you're gone. A little treat's one thing, but to try and sustain them for any amount of time out in the woods, throwing their diet off like that, especially if they're used to eating a specific diet back home, you're going to throw off their stomach regulations. It could give them gas or bloating, could give them the runs while they're in the woods, which imagine yourself having all this happen to you. The dog's going to be a little nervous. It's not going to know what's going on, or whatever your pet happens to be. It's just going to create a lot more stress for you and your pet. So try to keep their food consistent. Once again, now you're packing in more water, more food. You're going to have to allow this in your gear. As Ben said, some dogs get a little pack for them. They can carry some of the stuff in. At least their food. Water bottle might be a little heavy depending on your animal. Like, I wouldn't strap the water bottle to my dog. Poor thing would probably pass out after an hour. But, you know, and like the little waste baggies for their poop and stuff like that. They can carry all that stuff if you have a decent little pack for them. And if you are going to get a good pack for your dog, try not to get one that has too much dangly crap off it. Make sure it's fairly not like tight on them, but everything that's attached to the pack stays tight to the harness, if that makes sense. That way it's not like flailing out and catching on everything.
Yeah, you don't want anything that's going to get caught or hooked up when they're running through the woods, because they want to have their own freedom. Yeah, I agree with you. Try to keep their food the same as they would during a regular day. A trip is not the time to change up their diet or try something new, because if it works out poorly, it's just not going to work out for you well. The other thing is clean up after your dog, especially around the campsites. I know some people said to clean up everywhere. When you're walking down trails and stuff and you run into the woods, you may miss one. In reality, there's, in my opinion, there's foxes and wolves and everything else possibly doing it out there. I don't see it as a huge deal. It's not that different. It could have introduced something to the environment that probably shouldn't be there, but I don't stress about that. But definitely near campsites where people are, or if they're on the trails where people are walking, clean that up. And it doesn't take much. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah, and take care of your pet. So make sure you thought about everything. Bring the basic necessities, things like a brush so you can clean them out. As they get burrs and leaves and stuff in them, you need to clean that out and keep an eye on them. But yeah, I mean, and the last thing I wanted to bring up, we talked about protection, and it's not just against the other animals. You are far less likely to have a problem with a fellow hiker or a fellow human if you have a dog. Most people won't mess with somebody who has a dog because it's going to kick up a fuss. It's a hassle. There's easier targets out there, and you never want to be the easiest target.
Exactly.
And dogs are, regardless of size, do offer a certain level of protection from that. So, if you're at all worried about that, I highly recommend a pet.
And my last 2 cents that I'm going to throw out here, because I know we're coming up on our new time limit of 30 minutes, is sun protection. You worry about it for yourself, worry about it for them too. That means you may have to provide them a little bit more shade. You may have to cool them down a little bit more. They're wearing a fur coat 100% of the time. Depending on your dog, they can sunburn. Like the belly of my dog will sunburn. I actually have to sunscreen my dog depending on where I'm going. You know what I mean? Considerations. Their nose can dry out, so you may need to put a little bit of... you can actually buy a product. It comes in a stick, and it's good for their paws, their pads, as well as their nose. Basically, it's like beeswax and Vaseline is the best I can tell with some nice smelling stuff in it. But yeah, do a little research. Just make sure that you're keeping their pads soft and stuff like that. They're not drying and cracking out their nose. They're not getting too much sun, glare in their eyes. Once again, this is going to be specific to your pet, depending on how much attention you have to put into there. But it's still something else that is very commonly missed. People just grab their dogs to go walking around the woods. Big, not a big dog, but a dog with a lot of fur, not a lot of air moving through it, a humid day. Poor dog is just dragging turd behind, and they're like, oh, I don't find it that bad. Well, that's great. But your dog looks like he's half dead, man. Like, maybe you should take a second and, check this out.
And that was a huge concern with Molly. Molly was part husky, and you could tell. And when we were out on hot summer days, she would beeline it for water. And more often than not, she ended up kind of dirty, kind of wet, because it was hot and she just wanted to cool down, and she would run to the nearest body of water and lay down, and just you could see the relief come over her as she laid down in the cool water. So if they need to cool down, give them a chance to cool down. You'll see them. They'll find a cool spot to lay down, and if they're hot, you'll often see them dig up and find a cooler, moist ground. They'll lay in that. They'll find shade. Dogs are smart. They'll figure it out, but you have to give them the freedom to do that. And if you notice that they seem to be acting up, take a few seconds to give them that relief. Walk them to the water, find a shaded spot, and sit down with them. Yeah, I think it's something that I've always enjoyed taking my dogs with me, and it's when I think about getting a dog, that's what I think about. What kind of dog would fit my lifestyle, and that's what I'm looking for. So
exactly, and that's the bottom line there, is make sure the dog, or pet in this instance, is suitable to go on your adventures. And then when you're out on the adventures, bottom line, check in with your pet from time to time. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to look them square in the eye and be, oh, how you feeling today? But take a second, stop while you're resting, just kind of watch. Is their behavior being weird? Is there something they need? Just make sure you're checking in with them from time to time.
Yeah. They'll let you know.
Exactly. Most animals, they're pretty good about that, especially if you got a good relationship with your animal. And the only thing I would maybe suggest or recommend against is super young animals going into the woods. It's back to that whole training thing. Even with a bit of training, younger animals tend to be a little bit more curious. They'll be a little bit more apt to break character, if that makes sense. Like, if your dog's never seen a squirrel, for instance, even though they're good and trained, if they get out into the woods and see a squirrel, they may not be able to fight that impulse to go investigate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess if you want to sum it up, same thing we say about everything. Test everything out before you go. Same thing with your dog. Test your training. Don't do a 3-day canoe trip without never putting your dog in a canoe. Don't take them for a 3-day hike with booties if they've never wore booties. Don't take them for a 2-day hike with a backpack if they've never worn a backpack. Let them acclimatize to that. You wouldn't do that to yourself. Don't do that to your animal. But yeah, it is a rewarding experience to take your dog on an adventure, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to take the time and effort to do it right.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to the end of the show tonight. We're at 33 minutes, so I think that's our final thoughts and a good time to wrap it up. And it actually kind of hit right on to the end of where we needed to talk. It worked out pretty well.
Awesome.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us again this week, and we'll see you next week as well. Same time, same date, hopefully, barring something weird coming up, because that has happened once or twice in the past. But normally, we should be here Wednesday nights, 9 o'clock. So until then, get out there, have fun, play safe, let us know about it. Night, everybody.
Night all.